My name is Elaine Cook, and I started Friends of the Library because one day I was in the library signing up to join the book club. And you had to go on a waiting list because the building is so small that you couldn't have more members than 10, and even then they were squashed in. And the assistant librarian, Helen Feely, and I were talking about this, and she's saying, well, the children's area has room for 3, possibly 4 children to sit in, and they have no activities here. And Carolyn Thompson came in with her sister in a wheelchair, and it was almost impossible for her to get that wheelchair into the building. And I never realized that would be a problem for handicapped people, even though it was a problem for able-bodied people. So I said to Helen, Pugwash needs a new library. And she said, you're right. Why don't you start a Friends of the Library committee? Well, I didn't know how to do that, so I approached Paulo Branchalia, who always had a million ideas. That was in 2004, and we held an auction that year in the park. And the community was so generous. The businesses donated quality items, and the people bid, and we raised a couple $1,000s or so on that auction. And then the next year we held a talent contest, and that was really good. They passed the hat like 3 or 4 times, it came back filled. We raised a lot of money. But Paulo and I decided we had to start a formal Friends of the Pugwash Library. So I was coming out of the library one day, and Vivian Godfrey was coming in, and I recruited her. And from there, people kept volunteering. We had a committee. It was just wonderful to see the people support this project. In 2007, we became an official committee, and people stepped forward wanting to be on this committee. Pugwash needed a library. I was a reader. I came up with libraries always in my life. And when I came here, I loved the old building. But the books weren't always up to date, and you had to order them, and there were just little things like that. And we really needed a library here. And I wanted a library here because there are a lot of kids who don't play hockey, and they need the support of a library behind them. Well, that's why I agreed to form the Friends of the Pugwash Library. I just really wanted a library here for the kids. I have not been in the library until now. I really don't know how. I'm just kind of awed by it all. It just doesn't seem real yet. I can't believe we have this here. I can't believe how many tickets and cakes we sold to get this here. How many people have donated their time and resources to get us here. It's just such a community building. The whole community contributed to this building. And what a job they did. I mean, this is a gorgeous place. What a job they did. I'm so proud of them. Like really, really proud of what the village has accomplished to get this building.
My name is Vivian Godfrey, and I've always felt passionate about libraries because I feel libraries are part of a civilized society where everybody can get access to knowledge and reading, and I think in a democratic, equal society, that's a very important thing. So when Elaine talked about trying to form a new library, because it was quite clear the Pugwash Library was not adequate for the needs of the community, I was enthusiastic and wanted to join her. And so on May the 7th, 2007, we formed the Friends of the Pugwash Library. At the beginning, I was the secretary, so I took the minutes. I remember in the first year we had 12 meetings to do with fundraising and publicity. So that was my role then. And then so many people were involved, so many people in the community were involved, so it was coordinating that. Over the years, I just wanted to push for this new library all the time, and there was a point in 2015 where we began to feel that we weren't going to get anywhere. And then suddenly for it to all come together, and we really have to thank Murray Scott and Jen Hultling. There were so many people involved. I just feel it's wonderful that it happened. And I was just a small cog in the whole thing. And now it's finally here, and I'm so happy about it because it's going to contribute so much to the life of Pugwash.
I'm Helen Matheson. I live in Pugwash now. I moved here almost 20 years ago, and Elaine Cook, of course, was looking for people to help out with fundraising for a new facility. I had moved here because there were so many services, and my husband and I come from the city, so we wanted banks and grocery stores, and a library for me was a must. It had to be within walking distance, so I was thrilled. But then I saw how ragged in some ways it was because it was inaccessible to anybody older, anybody with a disability. So when Elaine asked, I said, yes, I'd love to help with something like that. I have a bit of a background in community development, and any key infrastructure that you bring to a small community can be exponentially beneficial. So a library, although it sounds a little ordinary for a lot of city dwellers, for a small community, it can mean a lot of different things happen. It's a safe space, first off. It's an accessible space. It's a place for children to feel wanted in a non-confining kind of way. So it seemed to me that it was a logical step, but to make it more physically accessible was the first goal. And secondly, big enough that children could come and actually have games and read books at their leisure and have groups come and meet. So that was the only real things that I wanted. It wasn't more books, wasn't more computers, it was about the space. I think I'm grateful, mostly, that I lived to see it. There were times when we didn't think we would. And I think I'm really proud of the work that we did. It was ongoing work that we did, and it raised a profile for what could be done, and with little or no resources, I might add, by willing people. And I think that's a real legacy.
My name's Noreen Smiley, and when I moved to Pugwash in 2007, I was interested in volunteering at the library. I had a background with writers, author tours, and in publishing, and it was a natural fit. Over the years, the Friends of the Pugwash Library held a number of events and other ways of raising money. There were a number of reasons we did that. Raise money, to raise awareness for the need of a library, and also to engage people in the community with the idea that a library was an important part of the community. So we held everything from raffles to auctions to a number of events, and that was more in my background. So we had a series of events called Words and Music, and we'd invite either a local or a Nova Scotian writer that we get a hold of to come to Pugwash, and we'd team them up with a local musician. We also did a series of banned books events. They were really, I especially liked those because they involved so many people in the community. It's a good question about what kept us going through the years, because there was no concrete plan to have a new library. There was no physical design to help sell the idea to people. It was just the realization that the old train station library was inadequate. And so and also knowing that it was one of the busiest little libraries in Cumberland County. So something had to give, and that kept driving these people forward, the people that were truly committed to keep raising that money. And we knew it wasn't going to be enough. I think we're aiming to, if we ever have a new library, maybe this will help buy books, you know, that kind of thing. And surprisingly, through the years, there was a certain momentum. So we might have held those events, but other groups, other things like, say, a women's dinner for International Women's Day, might have donated the proceeds from that to the library fund. The co-op, when they draw names are 50-50, we were on the list for that. The recycling depot, people could bring in their bottles and cans and say, we want this to go to the Friends of the Pugwash Library. So it accumulated over the years, surprisingly. It is nice to know that the community was behind this project, and it took a lot of resilience to stick with it. When I walked in the library yesterday for the first time, I must admit that I felt like crying, because it took so many dreams of so many people to make this happen. So I felt thankful.
I would just like to thank all the people who contributed to this. And I'm so happy for everybody. We'll all benefit from this.
My name is Stephen Leahy, and I am her eldest son, a twin brother of a very accomplished educational icon, my brother Douglas. Well, my mother was born back in the 1920s, but then lived through the Depression era, in which her family underwent, as did the whole village, some very, very difficult times, which I think seeded within her a sense of hard work and hardship, of course, as well as the setting of high standards which were needed at the time in order to see a successful lifestyle in that particular era. She was a historian by instinct in many respects, obviously interested in genealogy, and traced her ancestry back to Stephen Seaman, who was the founder of the village. My mother had a very filling life. I was never afraid of taking adventures, taking risks. She was married when she was 18. Douglas and I were born when she was 20. And about the time she was 26, we were about 4 years of age. We were living back in the woods, really, and on a farm, a pioneer farm. She decided at that time that she was going to become a teacher. Went to normal school, led her class in many of the dimensions in which she was being taught. Went from there back to Pugwash and began teaching at approximately the age of 27 or thereabouts in South Pugwash School. After that, she went to Pugwash and taught in a multi-classroom environment. So we went through the Pugwash High School routine. Then Douglas and I left for university, and Mother accompanied us since she went to North Attleboro, taught school, taught individuals at home, and then entered into the library service, in which she started off as at the bottom and rose up. But while she was doing that, she also furthered her education, took a bachelor's degree in library science. When she left with all sorts of distinctions, came to Pugwash. I guess she would have been about 60 when she came to Pugwash, and applied a lot of those skills in terms of the Historical Society and in the library most particularly. Very active in her church. Of course, was accompanied by her husband, and they led a very charming life. And she was very much the center of her community, and really was happy to be back with her siblings, as were Douglas and I when we came back to Pugwash ourselves. Some of the highlights of my mother's life would have been giving birth to twins, identical twins. Her life in many respects centered around her twins and the proper raising of those children. She was at heart a romantic. Some of the poetry that she read to us at bedtime were mostly romantic sorts of depictions of young people growing up. Each of us, Douglas and I, indicated we were going to come back to Pugwash because of the memories that were occasioned by the type of upbringing she gave us. One of her dictums was that she was the master of her fate and the captain of her soul. Now, Douglas and I inherently and vociferously believe the same dictums. And that has meant a big difference in terms of how we've elected to lead our lives and not necessarily join in with the crowd, but to be individualistic as she was. Very firm-minded in what she did, but also very compassionate and warm, giving in her heart. Mother had an affection, an affiliation with books, and where that came from is hard to describe. It may be just an active imagination and a curiosity that could only be fed by the opening of books and pages, which at the age of 5, she began reading, particularly to the age of 7 or 8, almost every night. I know that one of the things that she's left me with, instinctively or through the DNA or from whatever magical processes there may have been, is a love of words. And of course that curiosity that led her almost indelibly, almost in a forceful way into the library and into books, and she couldn't get enough of them. Getting up in the morning and going off to work was for her a thing of pleasure, because she would be surrounded by all of the books and by the insights and knowledge that those people of wisdom and philosophy and history could bestow upon her. It wasn't something that she thought of as being work, or that there was any hardship to it. She was drawn to it as a bee would be to the best flower in the springtime air. Well, Mother, and there were many pictures that would testify to this, was always sitting with a book, and when the children were nearby, those books were inevitably about little red foxes or Cinderella or some such thing, and she would pull the children and later grandchildren into her arms, and she would read those books, and they would be captivated by not just the pictures or the words, but the sound and rhythm of her voice as she was talking about it, almost as though she had lived with the little burr fox down in the burrow down by the old mill stream. My mother was very active in the local community in multiple dimensions. First of all, she was very active in church. She was, of course, active in the library, and of course she was always part of the local book reading community with her insights as a voracious reader. Of course, she had so much to communicate because of her experiences. Mother really liked the local area along the shore with the ocean and with the beautiful, she's a great lover of the spring and of the fall, but that was only part of it, because of course being a romantic individual, a romance loving the memories of growing up as a young girl. My mother motivated others primarily through her teaching legacy. I still have people, if you can imagine, where I was being taught in South Pugwash School, 1947-48, and where we went to Pugwash, there are still people today, they'll come up and say that she was the best teacher that she'd ever had. And she was teaching at a very young age, 26 years of age, 30 people in the class, 10 grades, lots of people. When we celebrated her birthdays, those people came out, all sorts of people came out to say just what a wonderful, wonderful teacher she was.
My name is Douglas, and Greta was my mother. I was the younger son. The highlights of my mother coming to Pugwash was her enjoyment of Pugwash, being with her siblings and active with the Historical Society, the Rebeccas, and above all, her church, the Baptist Church. I see Mother as very determined, very directive, and always affectionate, and always very, almost compulsively generous and understanding with our feelings and sensitivities. The reason we chose to recognize Mother in respect to this library were a number of reasons. Firstly, the library references or reflects a need of education and an embrace of education. And secondly, it encourages people to read and get compelled and interested in books and their meanings. Both reasons were very impelling for Mother from the very beginning of her educational experiences at the age of 10 or 11. With regards to the new library, she would be very enthusiastic, and I'm sure that she more than happy, I suspect, is the fact that we have recognized her need for books and library activities in giving her this recognition. In my view, Mother's legacy mostly embraced Stephen and I in Pugwash, bringing us up in Pugwash, instilling us in the ambience of Pugwash, and in teaching us the importance of education and books. Her legacy really, with respect to us, that have encouraged us to go on for education and for books. We both have very large libraries, and both of us have doctorates in education or philosophy. So we've reached arguably formally the highest pinnacle of formal education, and of course we really love and embrace our libraries. Mother was very instilling in us of the importance of education and books. She herself started to be interested in books at a very early age, which was difficult in Pugwash, a fishing village where books were very rare, and she had to go and search them out and encourage us to find them. She also, from the very beginning, through correspondence and talking to others, steadily increased her educational level from grade 11 to grade 12 for a master's degree, and eventually towards a master's herself. None of her siblings had any interest in education, and it was interested that she herself was so singularly determined to follow that course. I think there's a sense of amazement with respect to our mother. She was raised in a poor fishing village in Pugwash. She was always very directed, very ambitious, and she chose the two goals that eventually led to her financial independence and educational achievement, and that was through the books and actually education. So she came from a very poor fishing village, and on her own initiative and compelling concerns, she found success, in my mind, both spiritually and financially.
Betty Caroline Murray was born Betty Bird on March 16, 1923, in Southampton, Nova Scotia. Love of the written word was in her blood. She was the daughter of the well-known Canadian author Will R. Bird and Ethel Sutton Bird. During the 1930s, Betty and her brother Stephen traveled around the Maritimes with their father, who delivered presentations based on his World War I memoir. She witnessed firsthand the power of stories to both heal and connect people because her father's talks made it possible for many veterans to openly talk about their wartime experiences for the very first time. After completing school, she then went on to study English at Dalhousie University, where she met and married McKay Murray. A month after her marriage, her only beloved sibling, Stephen, was killed in action in France. The acute joy and pain of those events etched an indelible trait in her that became a hallmark of her character. While she never dismissed or diluted her anger and sadness over losing her brother, she consistently chose to be an advocate for positivity and peace. She shone this light on everyone she met. In 1950, Betty McKay and their young family left Halifax for New York. While caring for 3 children as a full-time homemaker, Betty completed an MA in English Literature at Columbia University in 1953. 10 years later, she started teaching English at Elmont Memorial High School on Long Island, becoming a well-loved and respected member of staff. Throughout her time in New York, McKay and Betty kept up their ties with Cumberland County by building a cottage in Lorneville. In 1980, the Murrays retired, bought a house in Lorneville, and returned to Nova Scotia for good. In 2009, McKay and Betty completed the circle of their life together by moving to Halifax, where they continued to host friends and family. In 2014, a year after McKay had passed away, Betty moved to the Mount Continuing Care community in Charlottetown. She passed away at the age of 97 on October 30th, 2020.
My name is Heather Murray, and I'm Betty's daughter. My mother personified the best qualities of a vibrant library in that she was accessible, she was open to change, she had a love of words, she nourished readers, she encouraged non-readers and helped them find reading they liked, and she was optimistic. Betty made things relevant, like books and stories and so on, to people, first of all, because she was a very good listener. She observed people, she thought about them, she was interested in them, and before she gave a book or recommended a book, she knew a lot about the person, so she could pick a book or a story that suited them. She said to me one day, "Parents are bows sending their children like arrows into the future." That was from something she'd read 20 years ago in college or something, but it was very relevant to our relationship at the time. And she could do things like that with her memory of what she'd read. If my mother knew about the new library and the room named in her honor, I think she would feel honored to have her name on a room in a library, and particularly in the Pugwash Library. She would love that the room is so flexible in its use. She'd love to know that there are workshops and meetings, debates, and poetry contests going to be held there. And of course, she's somebody who went to Pugwash every summer, and she would be very, very happy that there was a good library close to the cottage. If my mother was here right now and I could talk to her, I would say, "Mom, look at all the wonderful influence you've had on people. You've made everybody better." I would just like to say that not only is it an honor for her to have a room named after her, but that the room expresses her belief in community. And that's wonderful.
My name is Emily Murray, and I am Betty's granddaughter. My grandmother loved words and stories. Language was really important to her. A carefully chosen word delivered at exactly the right time, in the right way, she understood how that could affect a person. And I'm the beneficiary of many, many of those accumulating over my lifetime. Every time she gave me a hug saying goodbye at the end of a visit, she would always have just the perfect phrase, word, little bit of a poem, something she would whisper in my ear that she somehow knew I needed to hear. And every time it surprised me, and every time it was perfect. And she just had a talent for being able to know what that was. And I'm sure I wasn't the only person that she did that for. I mean, she had many grandchildren and many friends and many people close to her. But she understood the significance, the impact that could have on a person. My grandmother believed that books were your friends, so a library would be your playground. It's where you go to explore and discover and be energized by other people, sharing ideas, listening to other people's stories. I think for her it would be a playground. If my grandmother was here right now, I would ask her, what are you reading? Because it would be something amazing. And even if it wasn't, even if it was something not obviously entertaining, she would have found the nugget of wisdom, the clever insight, the relevant point that would have shed some light on my life. I feel tremendously fortunate to have had a woman like my grandmother guiding my life. And, growing up, lots of people have complicated upbringings and difficulties through life, and I was no different. Her shining example, perpetual kindness, unwavering interest, sincere interest in everything that was going on in my life was something that I don't know if I took it for granted, but I certainly miss it. And I feel so grateful to have had that. And I feel inspired to just be more like she was, to try to emulate those qualities that made her so amazing. And I think that's something we all can do. Everybody who uses this room and this library can think about the small ways that they can emulate some of these qualities that made everyone around her feel better. We could all do that. I think the world would be a better place.
My name is Steve Murray, and I'm Betty's son. She started coming to Lorneville when she was 2 years old. Every summer she came here when she could for 60 years, and then moved here and continued to live here until 7 years before her death. So she was incredibly attached to Lorneville, the Amherst Shore, loved this part of the world. I think both of my parents really felt the pull of Nova Scotia when they were living in New York and couldn't wait to get out in the summertime to come here, and we would just beetle it from Long Island to here. Every year, I think community was important to her because she was a very social person and liked taking part in the social mechanic of a community. She focused on the church here, very small church, well attended, but they had lost their organist, so she stepped up. She had played the piano her whole life. It was a pretty good pianist, but she practiced with the choir and played every Sunday. It cut into her personal travel. I mean, she put off trips so she wouldn't miss a Sunday of playing in the church. If I could say something to my mother now, I would tell her that her spirit is still here in the community. She had a large number of very good friends here and continued to keep in touch with the friends she had made in Long Island. She was a very social person. In her last 7 years, she left Halifax and moved to a retirement home or a seniors home in Charlottetown, and became the belle of the ball in that home.
My name is Pat McCauley, and I am Betty Murray's daughter-in-law, and I consider myself very fortunate to have a mother-in-law like Betty. She was an avid lover of libraries. She told the story to me many times when she was a child during the Depression. There was no money, but for Christmas one year she got a library card from the Amherst Library, and how profound that was to her. Not surprising, she grew up to be an English teacher. I can't imagine having someone like Betty who loved literature so much to be a teacher. I'm sure she had a huge impact on a lot of lives. Certainly had a lot of impact on mine. She was just a gentle, kind soul. She was a great person, a great book lover. I think she'd be thrilled to have her name associated with a library. In this digital age, to have libraries really enjoy a rebirth and to mean so much to a community. They're true community centers now where all ages can enjoy books in all formats, and it's not just books anymore, it's everything. So I think she'd be thrilled that she's associated with something that meant the world to her as a young girl and throughout her life. It was what she considered the greatest gift, is the written word, giving it to someone to enjoy it. And I think she thought of life as a book. In her latter months, she mentioned once that she would love to know how it all ends for us. And that meant for children, her grandchildren, her great-grandchildren, how the story ended. If Betty was here right now, I would tell her that we're all doing well. We miss her. We think of her often. We share stories. We still get together as a family, and the book's going just fine.
My name is Ari Ogden, and Betty was a good friend and neighbor for many, many years. And we loved each other, and we did many things together, and she was wonderful. We are presently in the house, which Betty called the old farmhouse, and we bought it from the Murrays back in 1989. And at that time, I fell in love with the house, and I knew it was going to become our forever home. And what made it really special was Betty and McKay built their second home here in this area next door. And we were very lucky to have them as neighbors. Betty was a person who was very interested in you as a human. She loved to hear your stories, and she was also a very broad-minded woman. She was well-traveled, and so she had her own stories to share as well. So often I think back to Betty when she was in her 70s, and she and her husband would be traveling off to New Zealand, and I think back and I can almost hear her voice saying, do what you can do right away. Like, don't wait. And I still take that policy. Why wait next year when you can do it now? She motivates, she inspires, she found people interesting, and she was broad-minded. I'm having an emotional time because, you know, I still miss her. And I miss her wisdom, and I miss her as a friend and a neighbor. We were 30 years apart in age. She would have been 100 this year. If I had the lovely opportunity to say anything to Betty today, it would be thank you. Thank you for being you, and thank you for sharing your life with me.
My name is Bill Murray, and Betty Murray was my mother. Well, my mother loved poetry. She studied it at a graduate level. She taught it at high school, both to the reluctant students and to students who were really enthralled with her inspiration around poetry. And she did write her own poetry on occasion, 4 occasions, and one occasion was for my wedding to Greta. The content of the sonnet was so meaningful to me because it was the shore in Lornville. It's true she has these real stretches of soul, but she was also very humble, modest, didn't like to be the center of attention kind of person. If my mother was here now and I could talk to her, I would say, thank you. Thank you for the gifts of your love of words. Thank you for the sensitivity that you showed to other people that I try to model in my life. And thank you for taking us to the shore.
My name is Hester Murray, and I'm Betty Murray's daughter. She was a lover of books from the get-go. When she was a little girl, she and her brother were allowed to go down to the Christmas tree and choose one present to take back to play with until her parents were ready to get up. And she told us many times about going down to the tree and feeling around until she felt a book and taking that treasure back up to bed with her. She always gave books and received books as presents throughout her life, and this lasted until she was her 95th birthday. She received at least 6 large books. I think one was the newest translation of the Iliad, and it was just a lifelong passion for her. My mother used her love of language and writing to be encouraging. She thought in stories, and she used stories to make sense of the world. And she had this way of casting you as the hero in your own story. She was a prolific and thoughtful letter writer, and her letters were not casual. She really opened her heart and made you know you were loved. We communicated a lot this way because we always lived apart, as adults. When I was a lonely or homesick college freshman, she wrote to me at least a couple of times a week, and I still remember that feeling of comfort and relief, seeing that little white envelope through the glass door of my mailbox. I found some old letters from her. I have so many letters, and this is one she sent to me. Enjoy the little things, for one day you'll look back and discover they were the big things. And, she writes about all the cold, difficult Januaries that have come your way. January people are kind and strong. Every letter had something like that. I sent her a card saying, every day the world is new, and thanked her for teaching me to see the world that way. My mother inspired others to love learning really by the way that she lived her life, full of open-hearted curiosity and wonder. I don't know, she just expressed her love for people openly. And at the gathering that we had after she passed away, all her grandchildren were there. And each one of them felt like they had a special connection with her, which is remarkable, I think. One gift my mother left me with was to love out loud and let people know that you cared about them. I think she knew if her name was attached to the new library, she'd be stunned. She was not ever someone to seek attention or recognition. But learning, engagement with ideas, and connecting people together were really who she was. And so to have her name connected to a room that was designed for that purpose in the part of the world she loved best would be absolutely thrilling. You know, it would just be perfect.
A new library will inject a passion for books and stories, writing and reading, into a community. It will create a space for listening to each other, learning from one another, and shining the light of our attention onto important social issues that we can face together.
The library will roar to life when people choose to be like Betty was, to care deeply about the stories of neighbors, to help them by listening, to express themselves in considered, well-informed ways and with benevolent purpose, to be endlessly curious and never to stop hoping that tomorrow will be better.